Okay, everybody, welcome to Satsang, July 23rd, 2026. And this week we have, it's pretty simple, but we're going to expand a little from it. And so we're going to start with Pointers from Nisargadatta Maharaj, the book that was written by Ramesh Balsekar. And remember what makes this so fresh? It's unlike most any writing I've seen. Because Ramesh had gone to Nisargadatta, he had retired as the CEO of the Bank of India, and as is tradition in the Indian culture, he was now going to go to the next step beyond householder and become, uh, move in his spiritual path. That's a real typical uh, thing that happens there. So he found out about Nisargadatta, and he went there. And what makes the writing so unique was that as he was there, an awakening occurred for him. But in the period of time from the time he got there until that awakening, he sat down and actually was writing his impressions of these particular meetings with Nisargadatta. So the satsangs. So he was writing these pieces. So today's a really short piece, but what's really refreshing about these pieces is most of the time when you read writing from someone who writes from the place that Ramesh typically wrote, it's already there, and in this case, he was on his way. So it's a different kind of a writing. It's simpler. It's nicer. And so I always recommend that to anyone who is as a really great reading piece. And if anybody needs it anytime, if you just contact me, I have a PDF that I send out. Michael does as well. So if you want the PDF from Pointers, all you have to do is give me an email or let me know, or give me, somehow or another, get an email in my hands, and you will magically have the PDF. So today we're going to do awareness and consciousness. It's chapter 5, and we'll walk through this, and then we've got a little piece called grabbing emptiness that follows on the back end. So this is kind of the fun part. So the outstanding feature about Maharaj's talks with visitors is the pervading sense of their spontaneity. Subjects are never selected earlier, and his utterances have a unique resilience, which gives them exhilarating freshness every time. And one marvels all the more when one recalls he's been talking like this without any previous preparation, 2 sessions a day, every day in the week, including Sundays, for the last many years. Could you imagine doing 2 songs a day? And then on top of this, Maharaj says with a chuckle of amusement, what do I talk about? Only one subject, the same subject, you and I, the world outside, and God. And it's true. That's all he does talk about. Very simple. So imagine twice a week, every day of the week, for many years on the one subject. So generally, he doesn't bother to wait for his audience before opening any topic that comes to his mind. Sometimes his small loft room gets filled to capacity within 15 minutes or so. Now, this small loft room, I want you to know, I don't think it holds more than 20 or 25 people anyway. So when he says small, he means small. At other times, when he starts talking, one might say, thinking aloud, there are hardly 3 or 4 persons present. Imagine that, 3 or 4 people at a satsang. But it makes no difference to him. He may talk even to a single seeker if he so chooses, and expound with him with zest the basics of his teaching, relating them to each other and placing them in true perspective. His mind is a whole mind that goes beyond pragmatism. His thinking is total thinking. One morning, when I had paid my respects to Maharaj and sat down, I found that there were only 2 other persons present. Maharaj suddenly said, "What's the difference between awareness and consciousness?" Very simple, huh? If any. When something like this happens, one does not really know if he expects an answer or whether he's merely thinking aloud. One hesitates to answer for fear of breaking the flow of his thoughts. But then he might also say, "Why don't you answer? Have you been wasting my time listening to these talks all these days?" Remember, he was a curmudgeon with no patience. So this morning, however, he carried on without waiting for an answer. And I want you to know Ramesh was like that too. Once he started, you didn't need to respond. He was going to take it to the end. He observed that awareness is of the absolute and therefore beyond the three gunas, whereas consciousness is something fed by and limited by the food body. When the food body is destroyed, consciousness also disappears. Mind you, no one dies. Now think about that for a minute. The body mind passes, and the very first thing that Maharaj says is, mind you, no one dies. That would be a news flash for the rest of humanity. I know that. The body, made of the five elements, mingles with the elements when it is lifeless, and consciousness, which is subject to the three gunas, becomes free of the gunas. Awareness is the primordial original state prior to the concept of space-time, needing no cause, no support. It simply is. Now, this is a really difficult one to absorb, as you know, because with causality, we talk about causality all the time, but it's very difficult to hold since everything that we engage in terms of our transactional speech is causal based. So it's very difficult to think of something being as a simply is. However, the moment the concept of consciousness arises on this original state of unicity, the sense of I am arises, causing the condition of duality. So consciousness is, in essence, duality. Consciousness extended into space and extended into time. Consciousness is with a form, a relation of awareness against the surface of matter. One cannot think of consciousness apart from awareness. Now, when I say that, or when that's said, that's just to point out that in our minds, a lot of times when we discuss something, we locate on one thing. So we think when we're talking about consciousness that we're not talking about awareness. And all this points out is that in the lived experience, right, we can talk about them as different components and different elements, but they always appear together. Well, almost together. There cannot be let's see, one cannot think of consciousness apart from awareness. There cannot be a reflection of the sun without the sun. But the reverse, there can be awareness without consciousness. So the reverse works. In deep sleep, for instance, there is no consciousness. It is resting, but awareness is certainly there because upon awakening, one is aware of having slept, but only upon waking. Maharaj never allows us to forget that it is consciousness alone which is our constant companion, right? And that it is the continuous attention to one's stream of consciousness that takes one on to awareness. The basic existence, which is life, love, joy. According to Maharaj, the very consciousness of being conscious is already a movement towards awareness. So understand, he's going to say this, the mind by its very nature is outgoing, always tending to seek the source of things within things themselves. Right? It is directed, if it is directed towards the source within, it is almost like the beginning of a new life. Think about that, a lifetime of going outward, and all of a sudden, the direction turns inward. Right? In essence, you're following the I am back. Awareness replaces consciousness. The I am, which is a thought and consciousness, ceases. In awareness, there is no thought. Awareness is the source of consciousness. Maharaj suggests that it is an excellent spiritual exercise to sit quietly and watch what comes to the surface of the mind. What we call thoughts are like ripples on the surface of the water. Thoughts always lead to identification or condemnation. They are products of preconceived notions and stand in the way of real understanding. Just as water is serene when free of ripples, so is the mind serene when free of thoughts, when it is passive and fully receptive. So I want you to notice here, that sounds all the world like meditation, doesn't it? Watching the ripples in the mind. So it gets a little confusing here, and I want to just touch on this for a second, because a lot of times you hear Ramesh, Nisargadatta Ramana, a lot of others say, they call it's called a lot of times in our world Neo Advaita. And I don't like those labels, by the way, as everybody knows, but that's what it is called. And what that is it means that there's nothing to do. That's true. But our holding of doing, right, completely rests in non-duality, and it rests in the sense that there's some I to do something. So when somebody says there's nothing to do, what they're pointing to is the I that would become conditioned thinking that it's doing something. So a lot of times we'll say, what you should do is engage in witnessing. It sounds like I'm doing something, isn't it? But my question is, when thought itself covers the entire canvas, right, and there's no sense of awareness whatsoever, did the watching stop? The watching's always happening. So really, when one says witness, they're simply saying the witnessing is happening. Find what's already happening. That's what's being said. Right? Still sounds kind of personal, but when you reduce it, this is consciousness speaking to consciousness. So it sounds like a personal direction. The minute it's seen, it drops. It's understood. Oh, that was the only thing that could have been said. When you're talking to a lot of other body minds, all language gets personalized. So there was a beautiful thing that happened this week. Um, I actually put a little link into Substack because it's a place where you can put the writings and the article, the pieces that I write that come through every week. If you subscribe to mine, then you get a copy of that because a lot of people don't like to go to the Facebook page. They want it delivered in their email. That's how you get it done. So it turns out that Gian, I'm going to speak about the piece that came out in your Substack a little bit here, Gian. So so what happened is that Gian Substack, there's a beautiful piece that appeared, I believe it was today or yesterday, and he's talking about doing a workshop, which for all the world sounds like meditation. But in the piece itself, he goes in to describe what it is that's actually happening, and he talks about he actually um, unwinds, if you will, this link between doing and non-doing, and how what it is that he's up to, which is a meditative approach for sure, right? Doesn't rest in the you doing, but rather it rests in the doing itself, right? Doing without the you doing. So doing is happening, but there's no sense of any individual or any autonomous being doing the doing. And he unwinds that, and it's a beautiful piece. And we'll talk a little bit about this later. There's um, a piece that I'm going to do, a Nasruddin story as usual. But just notice that when you get the advice not to meditate, what that is to see meditation as something that's a doing, right? But not set it up as something that you are doing. And almost always you'll notice that that advice is given to someone who is at the very beginning and is asking about it. Because what likely has happened to them is that they've lived a life where relying on whatever their practice is a piece that upholds them, keeps them in place. And so now they're here and they're getting exposed to non-duality, Advaita. And so what do they want? They want, what's your version of that piece that will keep me in place? And that's the question that's being asked. And so what happens is the response is, oh, don't set it up that way. That's not what we're trying to do, is to give you a new piece to support the who you already are. In fact, what we're trying to do is move past that. So I know that that's kind of a fine point, but just notice that. So Maharaj continues on. He's almost finished here. He says, in the mirror of your mind, says Maharaj, all kinds of pictures will appear, stay for a while, and disappear. Silently watch them come and go. Be alert, but not attracted or repelled. It is important not to be involved. The attitude of silent witnessing will have the effect gradually of driving away all useless thoughts, like unwanted guests that are ignored. So you really have to ignore them for a long time. And by being thus within yourself, that is, in the I amness, by watching the flow of mind without interfering or judgment, as a dispassionate witness, the deep unknown will be encouraged to come to the surface of consciousness and release its unused energies to enable you to understand the mystery of the origin of life. So you can see, if you use the example of the canvas and the painting the painting is consciousness, which covers the entire canvas. All awareness does is shrink that, if you will, so that the canvas itself is part of the perception. In fact, the canvas itself ends up being the perception itself. Right. So that's what he's after. Very simple. Very, very, very simple piece. Any questions, any comments at this point? All right, great. I'm gonna be
So,
a Ramesh. Go ahead.
uh, uh, awareness is the absolute.
Correct.
Okay.
Correct. So a lot of times, yeah, the nomenclature is kind of funny, but awareness or absolute awareness. I usually use both of them so that that question, Maharaj didn't necessarily put absolute in front of awareness. Ramesh tends to.
Okay.
And actually a lot of times people will use the term consciousness, and they'll use the term consciousness at rest and consciousness in action. Consciousness in action is what I would call just consciousness itself, right? Consciousness at rest is what they would call absolute awareness, right?
Thank you.
So just so you know, I mean, that's how you'll hear people use it different ways. So just, be ready for that incoming, because that's a great question. It really is. It's, you know, because in the world as we know it, when people are discussing non-duality, there's a whole world that discusses consciousness without understanding what non-duality is, or how it places consciousness and awareness. So those conversations can get incredibly confusing as well. Whenever you hear the word consciousness, you'll hear that. And then you'll also see in the Advaitic circles that we have this kind of angel on a pin thing going on, where we want to talk to each other about what the difference between consciousness and awareness is, which is for the most part an entire waste of time, right? Because the what Advaita does, I mean, what happened is, um, back in the day, I mean, I was with Ramesh. Well, I spent time with him in the early 2000s, but yeah, my seeking world, starting with Osho, was, from the very early 90s. And in that time, if you flew home to LA and said, "Hey, have you heard of a thing called Advaita or non-duality?" people would look at you like you were crazy. It had zero presence in our world. And then one day, I don't know what it was, maybe 2007 or whatever the heck it was, this thing blows up, and we have Facebook group with thousands of people in non-duality and Advaita groups, right? And so my reaction to that was, wow, cool. And then once I saw what was happening in the groups, I was like, no, 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 no. Because what we had done was westernized it immediately. There was no waiting. We didn't even have time for a transition, because the conditioning is so strong in us to think that something's happening when we're discussing something, that we engaged in that particular process. And then Advaita even got painted with this, well, that's the place where nobody does anything, right? And of course, that's lethal as well. And so the heart of Advaita in my mind is the lived sense, the presence, so the actual tangible on the ground life experience is what it is that ultimately we're talking about here. So I always use that little story about all of the wise men sitting on the side of the pool, discussing what water is, right? And the master comes along and puts his foot on the back of one of them and gives it a hard shove. And now one of the bright wise men is in the pool, right? Now, of all of those people, which one knows what wet is? The one in the pool, right? No words necessary. And that's Advaita. It's in the pool. It's not, it's our Advaita in the Western world has a habit of sitting on the side of the pool and discussing what wet is. And that's just something to be aware of and watch for. So great question on that.
So, Alan,
Yeah.
so this is a key point that we keep touching over and over again.
Yeah, no.
So, so I can get that some people have this lived sense of doing without a personal doing. But prior to that, for us who, let's say, don't have a lived sense of that, my experience is all I can do is be the witness, and until something drops away. But it's not. I can't make it drop away. But I can.
Correct. That's correct. And so what you're saying is exactly it,
Yeah.
right? So as long as it's personalized, right, then it's personalized until it's not.
Right.
So
And there's nothing anyone can do to depersonalize it.
that's correct. And yet you still are operated within this body mind called Joseph is operated within consciousness. So
I guess
doing
that.
is happening,
Yes.
correct?
Okay.
So the watching in a certain way, right, is it's always happening. In a certain way, it's a doing. It's just not your doing. And that's all and so getting to where it's not your doing is that's the experience. Go ahead.
No. So I can then have that concept and actually bring it into consciousness that this is consciousness acting through me and it's not my doing.
Yep.
But I'm still doing that.
Well, no, but I'm just saying that even that is consciousness doing that. Even
Right.
with the sense that I'm doing it, that's consciousness,
Yeah, get it.
right? So no problem there.
Right.
I mean, you get into this infinite regression thing, but I will say that if there is a pointer to be pulled out of this whole thing, right? Doing as an autonomous doer includes a sense of resistance. It's the resistance that lives around you as a single entity, which keeps you from everything else. And we're conditioned with that from childhood, right? A baby doesn't even know that it's separate. We have to build that separation in. And what that separation is a resistance to everything else to keep the continuity of the individual autonomous doer in place, because that's what we're conditioning that child to be. And then eventually that child becomes old like Joseph and Alan. But bottom line, that resistance until it drops. So from a pointer standpoint, the only difference is that the I'm doing it is a function of that embedded resistance that's always active.
Right.
That drops away through watching, and pretty soon now doing is happening with no sense of resistance that keeps the doing from everything else. You see, it's just everything is experienced. So ultimately the body mind is built to, right, simply appear seamlessly with everything else, right? As opposed to what we think, which is the body mind is built so that any single one can understand the entirety of the universe. That's not what the body mind was. That's ultimately not what it's for. But you see a lot of individuals who act within that resistance and follow that. I'm going to understand the entire universe, right? Well, we've got thousands and thousands and thousands of years of that, and all of those body minds end up in the same place. So we've got some pretty good evidence that that particular approach probably isn't all it's cracked up to be, or isn't effective in any way that we would understand. So what is the actual um, point of consciousness and arising itself. That's what Maharaj talks about every single day. But you are totally correct that until there's a felt experience, if you want to call it that. Now, when I say that, it's not your felt experience, but until the felt experience reveals itself, right? Then it's yours, and it's held within the box of resistance. Right? So no,
In that moment, the resistance has loosened or has fallen away.
yeah. And what you can notice this for yourself whenever you're asking a question, right? Are you asking it to shore up the resistance? Or are you asking it from the other place, which is, I'd like to see that continue to dissolve? And you can check that out for yourself.
Hmm.
But unconsciously, most of our questions that we've asked our entire lifetime are built to basically keep us in that place of resistance. So the
Right.
minute that we walk into satsang, what are we doing? We're asking these questions, right? And so those that are listening are going, God, there's something off with this, right? Even though they would do it themselves, but there's something they feel like there's something that within satsang, right? The flow is being interrupted, as it were, in a certain way. And what that is that resistance that lives in the questions. And you can check that for yourself. Right? And in fact, if you ask a question, a lot of times someone's going to come back and go, well, you take a look at that. And that's when everybody squirms under the microscope and everything, right? Because they've asked you need to be willing to do that and know that that's going to be part of the experience.
Yeah, yeah. Great. Thank you.
Great question. Thank you. All right, so we're going to talk about grabbing emptiness now, huh? So Sakyo, I'm going to tell a little Zen story here. Looked at one of his monks and asked a curious question: Can you get a hold of emptiness? The monk thought for a moment, then he stretched out his arm, cupped his hand, and closed his finger around the empty air. There, he said. Sekio examined the closed fist. No, he replied, that won't do. You haven't got anything in there. The monk, now genuinely puzzled, asked, then how should I do it? Without warning, Sekio reached forward, grabbed the monk's nose, gave it a sharp twist. The monk cried out in pain and instinctively pulled away. Sekio smiled. That, he said, is how you get a hold of emptiness. It's a marvelous story because it defeats the intellect before the teaching has ever begun. The monk is sincere. He's not pretending. He is using the only instrument he has ever trusted, the ordinary mind. The instruction seems straightforward. Get a hold of emptiness. So he does exactly what the ordinary mind has always done. It reaches, it grasps, it closes its hand and around what it hopes to possess. It is the movement every seeker knows intimately. The search begins with reaching for understanding, reaching for awakening, reaching for silence, reaching for God, reaching for awareness. The reaching itself feels so natural, we rarely question it. Right back to that question about the resistance in questions, right? Yet the entire Zen story quietly revolves around one astonishing fact. You cannot grab emptiness. Pause there. Not because emptiness is hiding, not because it is difficult, because the very movement of grabbing has already moved you away from what is being sought. The monk closes his fist, the master opens the entire teaching. You cannot grab emptiness. The sentence sounds simple. It is anything but simple. It describes the whole spiritual search. Most of us begin exactly where the monk began. We hear a profound teaching. We are moved by it. Something deep within us recognizes its authenticity. Then almost immediately, the ordinary mind converts the teaching into another project. How do I get there? What should I practice? How long will it take? And I can do that hour meditation in 15 minutes. What experience should occur? Am I making progress? How do I know? The reaching begins. Nothing's wrong with this, right? It's simply how consciousness initially functions. The seeker is sincere. The seeker longs for truth. The difficulty is that the seeker quietly assumes truth is another object waiting to be acquired, another possession, another achievement, another experience to be added to the collection The fist closes, nothing is there. Years ago, while working in business, we occasionally encountered systems that functioned beautifully, even though no one could identify exactly why. There was no central mechanism, no master controller, no obvious chain of command. Everything simply worked. Eventually, someone would shrug, and I would say, there are no moving parts. I've thought about that expression many times over the years. You can imagine what I would say that everybody'd go. It seems strangely appropriate for the inward journey. The ordinary mind assumes awakening must have moving parts. There must be a sequence, a mechanism, a process. Something causes something else. Someone progresses, someone arrives, someone awakens. Yet the deeper the inquiry becomes, the more moving parts quietly disappear. Who is exactly progressing? Who is accumulating understanding? Who is approaching awareness? The machinery gradually reveals itself to be largely imaginary. Something is functioning, understanding is deepening, conditioning is loosening, as Joseph said. Watching becomes more natural, and yet there are no moving parts. Chapter 5 of Pointers of Nisargadatta opens with one of his most remarkable questions. What's the difference between awareness and consciousness? He doesn't wait for an answer. He simply begins speaking. As Ramesh observed, it was impossible to know whether Maharaj was teaching those gathered before him or simply thinking aloud. It made no difference. The words came with the same freshness, whether the room was empty or full. Then Maharaj quietly dismantles one of the deepest assumptions we carry. Awareness, he says, belongs to the absolute. It requires no support, no cause, no beginning. It simply is. Consciousness, however, is something altogether different. It appears with the body. It is nourished by the body. It disappears when the body disappears. Then comes the metaphor that I've always found beautiful. Consciousness is like a reflection of the sun upon the water. There can be a reflection without there cannot be a reflection without the sun. There certainly can be the sun without the reflection. Awareness is the sun, consciousness is the reflection. How quietly that changes everything. Why? One of them is a product of causation, the other's not. It simply is. Most seekers spend years polishing the reflection, trying to improve consciousness, purify consciousness, perfect consciousness. Meanwhile, awareness has never been altered by any of it. You cannot grab emptiness because awareness is not another object appearing within consciousness. It is that by which consciousness itself is known. The monk's hand was reaching exactly in the wrong direction. The reaching itself belonged to consciousness. Awareness was already present before the hand had moved. The Zen koan, right? Maharaj points to something even subtler. He says the very consciousness of being consciousness of conscious is already the beginning of the movement towards awareness. So I always say that when the thought comes, oh, I need to witness, right? You're already out, right? The dissolution, the intensity of identification has already started to dissolve. That thought, I need to witness, bang, done. You're on your way. The sentence deserves to be lived with. Notice what he's not saying. He's not prescribing another practice. He's not adding another discipline. He's not suggesting a more sophisticated meditation. He simply says, become aware of consciousness itself. That alone begins the return. How extraordinary. The seeker imagines movement. Awareness requires none. The seeker imagines attainment. Awareness has never been absent. The seeker imagines a future. Awareness exists only now. No moving parts. This is why Maharaj continually directs attention towards the simple sense, I am. Not because I am is the destination, it's not. He says very clearly that even the I am is temporary. Right? It converts into awareness itself. But it is a doorway through which attention naturally turns inward. Right? Consciousness notices itself, and in that noticing, something begins relaxing. not because someone has achieved anything, because the grasping has momentarily paused. The fist opens, the hand remains, nothing has been acquired, everything has changed. You cannot grab emptiness, perhaps because emptiness is never asked to be held. What then is consciousness actually doing? Maharaj answers with remarkable simplicity. It thinks, it compares, it remembers, it anticipates, it names, it divides. Almost every movement of consciousness is an attempt to organize experience into something manageable. Again, there's nothing wrong with this. Without consciousness, we could not function. Without memory, there would be no conversation. Without recognition, we could not find our way home. The problem is not consciousness. The problem is when consciousness quietly assumes that it is the author of itself. They are like ripples disturbing the surface of still water. How beautiful and simple is that? Notice your own mind for a few moments. Almost every thought is moving towards one of two destinations. I like this. I don't like this. This belongs to me. This threatens me. This is right. This is wrong. This should remain. This should disappear. Consciousness is continually sorting, continually arranging, continually reaching. I always chuckle because I hear all of these. This is a current conversation about AI. Everybody's worried about AI. And I'm always like, oh, that's just consciousness on steroids, right? Why would one be afraid of that? Anyway, so you cannot grab emptiness because every attempt to grasp belongs to the movement that obscures what is already present. Maharaj therefore recommends something astonishingly uncomplicated. Sit quietly, watch, nothing more. He asks us not to improve our thoughts. He does not ask us to suppress them. He does not ask us to become spiritual thinkers. He simply says, watch. Watch the ripples. Watch the reflections. Watch the pictures that appear in the mirror of the mind. Let them come, let them remain, let them disappear. Do not interfere. Do not judge. Do not become involved. This is not indifference. It is intimacy without ownership. Because we often describe that as distance, right? And I think the intensity of identification, when that dissolves, we might normally label that distance, but it's not. It's intimacy, but without the ownership. The intensity is the belief that I am, and that I am that, whatever that thing that we're applying it to. That intensity disappears. The intimacy does not. The ordinary mind hears this as another technique. Awareness recognizes it as a description. Watching is already happening. It is only identification that keeps interrupting it. The very consciousness of being conscious is already the movement, no moving parts. All right, here we go. This is a fun one. At this point, another Nasruddin story comes quietly to our assistance. Nasruddin's wife, by the way, for those who don't know who Nasruddin was, Nasruddin is this character in the 12th century who was just so ordinary that a lot of people would call him a fool or stupid, but his wisdom has been with us for all of those years. Osho used to tell Nasruddin stories all the time. I loved them when I was in the ashram, so you'll hear me tell them as well. So Nasruddin's wife became determined to cure her husband of his colorful language. A lot of wives actually have been on that track. One morning while shaving, he nicked his chin and immediately launched into one of his familiar streams of spectacular profanity. His wife listened carefully, and when he finally finished, she triumphantly repeated every word back to him, perfectly word for word. She folded her arms and smiled, certain that she had made her point. Nasruddin looked at her for a long moment, and then he smiled. He says, "You've got your words all right." He says, "But you do not know the tune." So that would be my comment on largely what you see in Advaita. Don't believe it's simply the words. There is a tune. There is a tune, and that's the tune that the dissolution of the I am leads one to. The tune, the intimacy. This may be one of the finest descriptions of spiritual understanding ever offered. Many of us possess the words awareness, consciousness, presence, being, acceptance, witnessing non-duality. We become remarkably fluent. We quote Maharaj, we quote Ramesh, we quote Ramana. Eventually, we quote ourselves. The words become increasingly sophisticated, yet something quietly remains absent: the tune. The tune cannot be memorized, it cannot be repeated, it cannot be borrowed, it cannot even be spoken. The tune is what remains before the first word appears. This is why Maharaj spoke with such freshness. Hold on one second. Everybody knows my dog barks, especially when big birds come flying in, so I've got to get rid of that problem. So this is why Maharaj spoke with such freshness. He was not remembering teachings, he was responding. Every conversation arose from the living moment itself. The words differed. The tune never changed. Grandpa Ed, I tell stories about my grandfather. I had one of those wise men for a grandfather. I used to ask a question that has stayed with me for decades. Whenever someone would become completely convinced by a story, he would smile and ask, what has to be true for that story to work? Now you think that a 4 or 5-year-old wouldn't know that, but that's what he would say, right? It is such an innocent question, yet it quietly dismantles almost everything. Take any story. I am the doer. What has to be true for that story to work? I have always been this way. What has to be true? I will become enlightened. What has to be true? The separate self is making progress. What has to be true? Each answer reveals another assumption. Each assumption supports another. Eventually, an astonishing structure appears. The autonomous individual requires an immense amount of maintenance. It requires continuity through time, ownership of thought, ownership of action, ownership of memory, ownership of intention, ownership of awakening. One assumption supports the next until the entire architecture appears. I can remember at the age of 5, he'd say, the bird sits in a tree. What has to be true for that to be the case? And I'd say, Grandpa, there has to be a tree. See how simple that is? And then it moves forward. Even a 5-year-old knows if the bird sits in the tree, there better be a tree for that to happen. The inquiry begins not violently, quietly. One assumption is examined, then another, then another. Nothing dramatic occurs. The structure simply becomes lighter, more transparent, less convincing. Then one day something remarkable is noticed. There are no moving parts, no central controller, no independent manager. Life is unfolding, thought is appearing, action is happening, understanding is deepening. Yet nowhere can an autonomous operator actually be found. The fist slowly opens, nothing has escaped, nothing was ever inside. And this is what Ramesh would always tell people to do. Go home and find the thing that you think that you're the most responsible that happened today. And then spend the next 30 minutes and put together everything that needed to be true for that to be the case. And what happens is that one can see that what I thought I was responsible for really can't be the case. That is a doing, and it feels like my doing in the beginning. But eventually it's seen that it's just simply consciousness and awareness playing their role. The old Sufi story, one of Ramesh's favorites, points exactly in the same direction. A great celebration was underway. The king had assembled his ministers, generals, priests, and dignitaries. Every seat reflected a precise hierarchy of importance. Then a ragged Sufi mystic walked into the hall and calmly seated himself upon the king's throne. Chaos erupted. The chief minister demanded, "Who do you think you are?" The Sufi answered, "I'm simply sitting." The minister, growing increasingly angry, challenged him, "You certainly are not the chief minister." He responded, "I am more than the chief minister." More than the king? More than the king. More than the emperor? More than the emperor. More than the prophet? More than the prophet. Finally, in complete exasperation, the minister shouted, "More than God?" The Sufi smiled, "Yes." The room fell silent. The minister whispered, "But beyond God, there is nothing." The Sufi bowed gently. "You are right. I am that nothing." How perfectly that concludes the entire movement. The Sufi is not claiming superiority. He's dismantling the hierarchy itself. Before minister, before king, before prophet, before God as an object, before consciousness, before even the appearance of I am, awareness, nothing added, nothing removed, nothing achieved, nothing possessed. The monk reached into empty space. The master reached for his nose. One movement belonged to consciousness, the other belonged to awareness. One attempted to understand, the other interrupted understanding altogether. We spend years reaching into empty space, searching, practicing, accumulating, improving, grasping. Then perhaps unexpectedly the hand relaxes, the fist opens, no moving parts, nothing has been acquired, nothing has been lost, and nothing has been added to what you are, and nothing has been taken away. The tune was never hidden inside the words. Awareness was never hidden inside consciousness. Emptiness was never waiting to be grasped. It was only waiting for the reaching to come to rest. The monk had the right question. He simply reached with the wrong instrument. The master did not give him a better answer. He removed the one who imagined there had to be one. And in that instant, without effort, without attainment, without anyone succeeding, emptiness was no longer something to be grasped. It simply was what had always been. So a lot of people will have what Ramesh calls free samples. Probably most of you have done that. The moment where there is happening with no one making it happen, a free sample. So what happens? That closes off. And what happens in the closing off? The old conditioning has come back and it says, I don't want to lose that. I don't want to lose that. I'm going to grab it and hold on to it. And in the grabbing on and attempting to hold on to it, the free sample itself disappears. It's often said that Yehiel Gibran wrote one beautiful book. It was called The Prophet. And then he wrote a bunch after that. Moshe used to say that none of them ever amounted to the first one. Because in the first one, it was simply the moment of the free sample. And all the ones that followed were attempting to recreate the prophet. And when it's consciousness grasping, the output is never going to be the same as the pure emergence itself was or is. And that's the free sample. All right, so that's my piece for today. Any comments?
Thank you as always. That's my chief highlight comment. Just, yeah, transmission is occurring. Absolutely.
So
I would add-
one of the ways to play with this, Tim, it's a lot of fun, is because you'll relate to this because Tim and I have some personality characteristics that are the same. And one of them is when we believe something, we stubbornly believe it. So the thing to do is go find the thing that you most stubbornly believe, right? And then start to unwind that one,
yeah,
right? You know what I'm saying? Just go after it, right? Just go after that one.
full bore.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. For those of us that are stubborn, and some of us gotten that line twice, that go get the one that you've applied your stubbornness to the most. It's funny, everybody knows I love dogs. I've rescued dogs for years, and I always chuckle because somebody says, "My God, it's so amazing what you do." That and I said, "No, here's what I did. I love is something that's always there. What I did is I took stubbornness and put it behind it, And what comes out of that is stubbornly loving my dogs. So it does have a use as well. Uh, any questions? Sachit, where are you?
Uh, no, no questions today. Today was more, mm, I feel much more relaxed after this. Yeah.
And I can feel it. That's why I asked you. I wanted to hear it. I'm going, I can tell. Yeah. So, so the thing that happens when you start to get anxious about what needs to happen, right? It's just a hand grasping, right? That's all that's going on. And now you're in this wonderful, you can see that right now, right? It's really obvious. You know, and sometimes I would get where you are right now, and I would say to myself, why was I asking all those questions the last 15 stop songs? Holy cow, right? Because it was so obvious in the when you're relaxed, it's so obvious in the moment of relaxation. And so not obvious when you're tense, right? Like you couldn't see it if you tried. So you keep trying to keep trying to quote unquote fix what you think is wrong with the stuff you've always used to fix everything that's wrong, and you're sitting here for a reason. So lovely input. Anything more, Joseph? Go ahead, Jill.
No,
Oh,
I'm
I
good.
have a question. So emptiness is interchangeable with awareness, the
Um, in
terminology.
this, in this, in the Buddhist sense of things, yes. So that's
Okay.
why so emptiness is a particular Buddhist term, right?
Yeah,
So you're not going to hear it a lot here, except for I used
but
it
it's
because
interchangeable.
and it came from the Buddhist story. So it is
Yeah.
so yes, it's interchangeable. Just understand that you're here, you're going to hear almost always absolute awareness or awareness and consciousness will play
Hmm.
with those two things. And then always remember when we're talking about one, the other ones, they're always awareness and consciousness, consciousness emerging from awareness as it were, right? Awareness simply always is. So
Right.
so in the lived experience, it's only in our mind, and that's why we always say all of these are pointers, right? Because
Hmm.
no matter what I say, it's a piece of something.
Yeah.
So all I can do is take that piece and go, and don't the old Buddhist one, remember? He's pointing at the moon and he's going, don't look at my finger.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's like that.
Yeah.
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 We want to
Yeah.
discuss what the finger is all about.
Right. And I know it's just a word, but
It is.
there's schools and they have their own terminology, but it's basically the same thing.
It really is. It
It,
really
it's
is.
it's the
Yeah.
same message. Yeah,
Yeah.
one
And,
thing.
and you,
There's one thing, or no thing, or everything, or
yeah.
with the terms. Okay,
And
thank you.
that's why I don't like this whole thing they do with this kind of parsing, the angels on a pin thing.
Yeah,
Because it doesn't
yeah.
because
No.
the simplicity of
Hmm.
awakening, right? Immediately, I'll see something in a thread and I start to read and I get tired the minute I look at it. I go, oh, because it's going nowhere, right?
Right.
But it's
Right.
being actively discussed with zest,
Yeah.
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 I always remember, um, and I'll never forget this, but somebody got up and was speaking to Osho, and they launched, and I don't know, Osho was trying to jump into the middle of it, and finally he turned to somebody, and you could hear it in the microphone, um, and he says, "This person's talking, and they actually think they're saying something." I don't know why,
Yeah.
but
Yeah.
those of us that were sitting there were like, yeah, how many times have I been
Mhm.
basically foaming at the mouth and thought I had something to say?
Yeah.
Yeah,
Blah blah blah.
exactly.
Yeah.
That's all it
Yeah.
was. Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you.
You're welcome. You're welcome. All right. So I told everybody, by the way, the Substack link is in here. Just like I say, if you want to get that thing, if you want to get it. I will say one other thing, and that is that we've taken the songs and put them together. So we're actually working on a book right now for this last year of songs, and so that'll be something that when it happens, will be available to everyone. And we still haven't decided exactly what we're gonna do with all that. And then I'm also going to post on my own Facebook page, just, the link to our group, the link to everything. So folks that are looking for it, I find it kind of interesting. I'll see people go, where can I, where can I go to satsang, and of course, you don't want to jump on and say, hey, we're doing one, come on here, but we definitely are available. And I always say the difference, what happens in this satsang, what the attempt is always to make sure that all of us are held, because it's really truly, love is the piece, if you will, that covers the gap. And so it doesn't matter how anybody judges a question or a comment. You notice in here, it's all fair game. And that, to me, when I sat with Osho, when I sat with Ramesh, pick the others, I was, even UG, when you would sit with him, there was always a sense satsang was a holding. It was keep quiet, come to satsang. And the reason that satsang was so important was it was the holding, right? It wasn't a place for someone to go and feel bad because they didn't know this, didn't know that, any of that. And so everybody in here has done just a wonderful job over the last year of dedicating themselves to that original sense of satsang, which is the holding. So
And this is every week?
Every week
This is
on
every week?
Thursday at 2.
Oh,
Yep,
great.
right now. Yeah, we do it every week. And
Okay. I'll be back. This was
okay,
wonderful.
please come. There's a group, like I
Yeah,
said,
thank you.
there's some folks that aren't here today, but we kind of have a regular crowd that wander in and out. And like I say, anybody that that wants that experience, like I say, it's not somewhere, no. Well, the bad news is that anybody that wants to come and cross intellectual swords, right? I'm dead at the first moment, so that's done. So because I'm not that person. So you don't want to come here and necessarily do that, because I'm not your guy. So yeah, you have to go somewhere where the person speaking is like really smart. I always say that I love Francis Lucille, because he's just so intellectually brilliant. But at the same time, I watch people get in love with that, not what it is he's up to. And but no, if someone does that here, we can say, hey, Francis will handle that question for you. That he's not here. All right, everyone. Thank you for coming. It was a beautiful time, and I'll see you guys all next Thursday.
Thank you.
Thanks a
All
lot.
right. Much love.